There is a silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels loud, confusing, disorienting, like something is being said but no voice can be heard. Perhaps you've felt this silence, not the restful kind, but the kind that makes you wonder if the universe has turned its back on you. You ask for signs, you pray, you meditate, but all you receive is nothing, or so you think. What if that silence is the message? What if the universe is not absent but deeply present, and you've just forgotten how to listen? This video is about something most people never talk about when discussing manifestation or inner power. We aren't here to simply talk about raising your vibration or trusting the universe. We're here to question what happens when everything gets quiet, so quiet that you're left alone with your own energy, your own doubts, your own fragmented desires. As Dr. Joe Dispenza often says, transformation happens not in the noise of external action, but in the stillness where energy begins to reorganize. But if you've been conditioned to expect loud confirmations, instant answers, or external signs, then the silence can feel unbearable. It can feel like failure. Yet in truth, it might be your greatest opportunity for alignment. The mystic Carl Jung spoke about synchronicity as the universe's way of whispering through patterns, symbols, and timing. It's not always a loud yes. Sometimes it's a pause, a delay, a closed door, not to punish you, but to realign you, to bring you back to the present moment where real power lives. And in that stillness, something extraordinary can occur. Your force returns. Not the force that strives or pushes, but the one that flows, that listens, that becomes. So the question we are really asking is this: have you mistaken the silence for absence? Because if you can learn to hear the quiet, you may realize the universe has been speaking to you all along. And what it's saying is this: open your inner eyes, reclaim your energy. You are not lost. You are being summoned back to yourself. The silence that screams. Why you're not hearing the universe's signals. There is a kind of noise that wears the costume of silence. It doesn't shout, it doesn't echo, but it invades you. It's a presence, not an absence. And in moments of transition or emotional disorientation, that silence becomes haunting. You wake up in the middle of the night, your thoughts racing, wondering if the path you're on still makes sense. You feel it at the end of conversations, in the space between your desires and your results. This silence doesn't comfort, it confronts. And perhaps the deepest question buried inside that discomfort is, why am I not receiving answers? The truth is, you are. But you're expecting answers to look like certainty. You're expecting signs to be loud, obvious, even miraculous. Yet the universe doesn't communicate in the language of logic or volume. It speaks in resonance, in coherence, in symbols that don't knock on your door but rather hum at the edges of your awareness. And most of the time, we miss them. Not because they aren't there, but because we're not in the right state to receive them. This is where neuroscience and spirituality intersect. Your brain filters reality. It shows you what aligns with your internal emotional narrative. When you're in a state of fear, urgency, or scarcity, your mind filters for chaos. You literally become blind to anything that doesn't match that internal vibration. Joe Dispenza speaks of the electromagnetic field of the heart as the gateway through which we both send and receive information from the quantum field. But here's the paradox. If your heart is incoherent, racing with anxiety, heavy with disappointment, it becomes like a broken radio trying to tune into a cosmic broadcast. You don't hear the music, you hear static. That's what spiritual silence often is. Not a lack of signal, but a jammed receiver. And it gets deeper. In our modern world, we've been conditioned to seek answers externally. Social media, digital dopamine, endless advice. We rarely stop. We rarely descend into our own silence. The result is a kind of spiritual dissociation, being connected to everyone but ourselves. The moment we try to reconnect, it's uncomfortable. Why? Because the first thing you feel isn't clarity. It's noise. Emotional noise. Old traumas resurfacing. Doubts screaming louder than truth. And in that moment, many people turn away. They misread discomfort as disconnection. They assume the silence means nothing is happening. But healing is never loud. Transformation begins in quiet, often when we feel most alone. Carl Jung understood this on a profound level. He described the process of individuation not as a path to perfection, but a descent into the self, into the dark, into the contradictions. It's there in the underworld of your own psyche that the symbolic language of the universe becomes visible, not in signs that confirm what your ego wants, but in patterns that mirror what your soul needs. A friendship that ends, a job offer that falls through, a delay in a dream you thought was meant to manifest right now. These are not random setbacks. They are alignments in disguise, recalibrations that appear as silence but contain intelligence. One of the most damaging misunderstandings in the spiritual community is the belief that signs must feel good to be real, that the universe only says yes in the form of flow, ease, or external green lights. But that belief creates fragility. It leads people to abandon their inner compass the moment things get quiet or hard. Yet, every wise tradition, from the Tao Te Ching to the writings of mystics like Rumi, has said the same thing. The divine doesn't always answer in light. Sometimes it answers in shadow, and if we learn to stay present in that shadow, to stay awake in the silence, we begin to see. This is not a passive state. Listening to silence is an active practice. It's an invitation to feel without solving, to observe without labeling, to sense without immediately interpreting. It's a rewiring of how you relate to time and mystery, and this is where many people falter. They want answers quickly. They want clarity in a single meditation or breakthrough in a week. But the universe operates on rhythms, not deadlines. If you are not attuned to those rhythms, the silence will always feel like rejection instead of redirection. A subtle, yet powerful shift begins to happen when you stop demanding signs and start embodying stillness. The more you listen without expectation, the more you begin to recognize the fingerprints of the divine in the most mundane moments. A phrase in a book you weren't supposed to read, a song that plays unexpectedly and speaks exactly to your hidden longing, the timing of a call, or the way a stranger's words bring tears to your eyes without explanation. These aren't accidents. They are what Jung called causal connections, synchronicities, that reflect the dance between your soul and the structure of the universe. But here's the twist. You can't control when these moments happen. You can only become receptive to them. And receptivity is not passivity. It's a frequency. It's a decision to tune out the habitual noise of your mental chatter and tune into the subtler rhythm of your own presence. Joe Dispenza often reminds us that you don't get what you want. You get what you are. If you're vibrating confusion, you won't recognize guidance. If you're clinging to certainty, you won't make space for wisdom. Guidance comes through coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and energy begin to align even quietly, even awkwardly. It's important to acknowledge that this silence can be terrifying, especially if you've grown up needing to perform for love, to achieve for worthiness, or to control your environment for safety. The silence strips all of that away. It shows you what's underneath the masks. It demands authenticity, not perfection. And that's the real reason many people run from it. Not because it's painful, but because it's honest. There is no pretending in the silence, and no external voice can rescue you from what you've refused to feel. And yet, this is where true empowerment is born. Not in affirmations, but in awareness. Not in endless searching, but in presence. The silence that once felt like abandonment becomes a sanctuary. It becomes the sacred space where you meet your truest self, not the version trying to manifest a goal, but the one who remembers she already belongs to something bigger, something intelligent, something kind. The universe doesn't need to prove itself with fireworks. It proves itself in the echo of your heartbeat, the breath that continues even when you've lost hope, the gentle pull to begin again, even when your mind insists it's over. So the next time you feel like the universe is silent, ask yourself, am I actually listening, or just waiting for something that sounds like certainty? The signs may not come in the way you expect, but they are always present. And when you become still enough to hear them, you'll realize the silence was never empty. It was full of everything you needed to remember who you are becoming. Invisible codes, how the universe is speaking to you right now. It's easy to assume that if we don't hear words or see tangible results, nothing is happening. We equate stillness with stagnation and overlook the truth that most of reality operates beneath the surface. Like the roots of a tree, the real transformation happens in unseen realms. And just because something isn't loud doesn't mean it's not meaningful. In fact, the universe often speaks most clearly in moments of subtlety, timing, and pattern. These are its invisible codes, constantly active yet so often missed. Imagine waking up one morning feeling an unexplainable pull to take a different route to work. Along that route, you encounter a person or a message that changes your thinking. Or consider those repeating number sequences, 1111, 444, 333, appearing when you least expect them, but somehow always tied to a deep question or longing you've been holding. Are they just coincidence? Or are they a language, symbolic, sacred, and encoded, designed not for your logical mind, but for your intuitive self? The mistake many people make is expecting guidance to come in their native tongue, in their preferred emotional state, in a format that comforts the ego. But the universe doesn't speak in comfort. It speaks in resonance. Its language is pattern. Its vocabulary is synchronicity. You see the same animal 3 times in a day, hear the same phrase from different people, or stumble on a passage in a book that echoes a thought you hadn't dared say out loud. These are not mere repetitions. They are alignments, energetic confirmations, echoes of a field that is alive, intelligent, and responding to you in real time. Joe Dispenza's research into the electromagnetic field of the heart offers a glimpse into how this dialogue happens. When your heart and brain are in coherence, meaning your emotions and thoughts are aligned, you enter into a state where your energy interacts more clearly with the quantum field. In this state, you're not just noticing signs, you're attracting them, not because you are demanding, but because you are matching. You become a frequency that speaks the same vibrational dialect as the universe itself. But what blocks this communication is not the lack of signs, it's the emotional noise we carry. When we are burdened by fear, urgency, or self-doubt, we are out of tune. We don't recognize the symbols because we're too busy searching for a result. It's like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a storm, and sometimes the whisper is saying, "Slow down, look again." You're missing the message in your hurry to find meaning. This is where understanding becomes transformative. Signs are not meant to replace your intuition. They're meant to confirm what you already feel in your body, but may be afraid to trust. That hesitation you feel before saying yes. That surge of energy when you're about to turn away from a choice you've outgrown. That dream that keeps coming back, bringing with it images, symbols, or a voice you cannot quite place. These are the codes. Not meant to be solved like riddles, but lived into like prayers. One of the most profound shifts you can make is to stop asking, "Where are the signs?" and begin to ask, "What is already happening that I haven't labeled as guidance yet?" That small question reorients your awareness. It trains you to notice the unexplainable calm after an anxious thought, the way your body leans forward when something is aligned, the way your energy contracts when something violates your deeper knowing. The universe is not limited to numbers and symbols. It speaks through the language of your nervous system, your breath, your emotional responses, and the synchronicity of timing. But here lies a paradox. The more you chase signs, the more elusive they become. That's because chasing is rooted in lack. It's a vibration of "I don't have what I need," which puts you out of sync with the very flow you're trying to access. Instead, the practice is one of softening, of returning to presence without agenda, of trusting that what you need to see will be revealed not when you demand it, but when you're truly ready to receive it without needing to control it. This readiness comes from coherence, from cultivating a relationship with yourself that is built on listening, not fixing, from observing without immediately interpreting, a journal entry, a walk without headphones, a conversation where you actually hear what someone is saying instead of waiting to respond. These tiny practices open the channel, they widen the field, and in that spaciousness, signs begin to appear, not as fireworks, but as breadcrumbs. Carl Jung described these experiences as a causal, that is, not caused by anything in the traditional sense, but connected through meaning. He understood that what looks like chance is often the universe revealing its hand, but only if you're paying attention. And not just intellectually, but emotionally, energetically. You must become a different kind of observer, not one who watches from a distance, but one who feels from within. There's a kind of knowing that comes when you see the world this way. Life stops being a series of events and starts becoming a living mirror. Everything becomes a teacher, every encounter a message. Not because you're projecting meaning onto it, but because you're finally vibrating at the level where meaning lives. And still, there will be moments when the signs don't make sense, when they seem contradictory or too subtle to interpret. That's when trust must lead. Trust that the signal has been received, that even if you don't understand now, you are being shifted, gently or drastically, toward the version of you that can, the version of you who no longer needs certainty to feel safe, who no longer needs confirmation to keep going, who can walk in faith, not because the path is lit, but because your inner eyes have opened. It's worth saying again, signs do not come to those who beg. They come to those who are aligned, not perfectly, but consistently, with compassion for their process, with curiosity instead of control, with presence instead of panic. The more you become this version of yourself, the less you will need to find signs. They will find you. In the tone of someone's voice, in the color of the sky, in the gentle way you forgive yourself after another day of feeling lost. This is the language of the divine. In time, you will realize that the signs were never meant to answer your questions. They were meant to change the way you listen. And once you shift from seeking to sensing, the universe will feel less like a mystery and more like a memory, something you're not learning for the first time, but remembering how to understand. Because at some level, beneath the doubt and the noise, you already speak this language. You've just forgotten. Until now. Inner disalignment, how you block the signs through your own frequency. Not everything you desire is out of reach. Sometimes it is simply out of alignment. And that misalignment is not a punishment. It's a reflection, a mirror showing you where your energy, emotions, and thoughts are fragmented. You may believe you're open to guidance, receptive to signs, and fully aligned with what you want. But the truth is more nuanced. You might be sending one message to the universe with your words, another with your emotions, and yet another with your actions. This energetic incoherence creates static in the very field where clarity is born. It begins subtly. You visualize abundance, but feel anxious about money. You affirm your worth, but quietly doubt if you're good enough. You ask for love, but brace yourself for abandonment. These contradictions don't make you flawed. They make you human. But they also block the very communication you're trying to receive. The universe doesn't respond to your surface. It responds to your essence. And your essence, your frequency, is shaped by your dominant emotions, not your temporary intentions. Dr. Joe Dispenza often speaks about the necessity of coherence between the brain and the heart. When your thoughts and emotions are misaligned, your electromagnetic field becomes erratic. Imagine trying to send a signal across a broken transmitter. It doesn't matter how clear the message is if the frequency is scattered. And this is where many seekers become stuck. They believe their practices are enough, the affirmations, the meditations, the vision boards. But underneath all of that is often a river of self-doubt, unprocessed grief, or emotional fatigue. And no ritual can override an internal frequency that contradicts itself. This emotional dissonance often originates in early conditioning. You were taught to suppress your needs, to seek validation externally, to achieve in order to earn love. And so, even when you begin a spiritual path, those old codes linger. You try to manifest from the conscious mind, but the subconscious is running an entirely different program. One that whispers, "You don't deserve it," or "You're not safe if you succeed." And these whispers become the dominant frequency, because energy follows emotion, not just thought. Carl Jung understood that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. In manifestation, this principle is critical. If your subconscious is rooted in fear or lack, no amount of spiritual effort will yield lasting results. It's not enough to want something. You have to become the version of yourself that can hold it without sabotage. And that requires emotional integration, not spiritual bypassing, not pretending to be positive when you're actually grieving, not forcing a vibration you haven't authentically reached. But this is not a hopeless realization. It's liberating. Because once you identify that the blocks are not out there, you reclaim your power to shift them. The signs haven't stopped. You just haven't been in resonance. You've been reading the universe like a book in the wrong language. Once you return to coherence, the same life begins to speak differently. What once felt random begins to form a pattern. What once felt delayed begins to feel perfectly timed. But that only happens when you become internally aligned with what you're trying to receive. This alignment doesn't happen overnight. It begins with presence, with noticing where your desires and your emotions contradict each other, where your thoughts pull you forward, but your nervous system pulls you back, where your affirmations sound strong, but your inner child still trembles. These internal fractures don't need to be fixed. They need to be held, acknowledged, felt. Because healing isn't the erasure of wounds, it's the reintegration of all the parts you once abandoned in your pursuit of being acceptable, desirable, or safe. There is a kind of clarity that only arises when you sit still with your incoherence, not to judge it, but to understand it. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to name the ways you have participated in your own blocking. And slowly, with compassion, you begin to choose differently. Not dramatically, not in a grand gesture, but in small, energetic shifts. You forgive yourself when the anxiety returns, instead of shaming yourself. You pause before reacting to fear. You breathe deeper, instead of rushing into old habits. These small acts of alignment matter. They rewire your field, and in that rewiring, you begin to hear again. Not with your ears, but with your being. You notice the signs that were always there. The conversation that confirms your secret thought, the message you needed buried inside a film you almost didn't watch, the sudden peace that arises when you finally say no to something that drained you. These are not coincidences, they are feedback loops, echoes of your rising coherence. And the more you embody that coherence, the clearer the communication becomes. There will still be moments of doubt. That's part of the path. But the difference is that doubt no longer drives, it walks beside you. You acknowledge it, but you don't hand it the map. Because now you know how to return to alignment, not through force, but through awareness, through kindness, through the gentle discipline of feeling what's real and choosing what resonates. Joe Dispenza reminds us that the quantum field responds not to what we want, but to who we are being. And who you are being is not determined by your declarations. It's shaped by your frequency, and your frequency is shaped by how deeply you are willing to listen to yourself, especially the parts that feel inconvenient, emotional, or contradictory, especially the parts that haven't yet caught up to your vision. This is the inner work, not flashy, not always comfortable, but it is sacred. It is where the real shift happens, not when the sign appears, but when you become someone who no longer needs a sign to believe, when you trust the rhythm of your own soul enough to act without proof, when you feel the pulse of the universe not as a separate entity, but as your own heartbeat. And in that moment, alignment is no longer a goal, it becomes your natural state. You stop chasing guidance and begin to live in it. You stop asking if the universe is listening and realize you are the universe listening to itself, remembering its own language, one coherent breath at a time. Reawakening inner power, how to align with the universe's signals. There comes a point in every inner journey when the search for signs becomes less about validation and more about remembering. Not remembering in the traditional sense, but a deeper recollection, a reactivation of something ancient within you that never truly disappeared. It's the realization that what you've been looking for outside has always existed in silence, waiting for your permission to return. This is not about awakening a new power. It's about returning to the original frequency you were born with, before fear, failure, or doubt interrupted the signal. When people speak of manifestation, they often refer to it as a method, a technique, a means to acquire something. But real manifestation isn't just about getting what you want. It's about becoming coherent with who you are. And the moment you begin to realign with your authentic energy, signs don't just appear more clearly, they multiply. You begin to notice how life bends toward your inner state, not because the universe is responding to you in parts, but because it is responding to you as a whole. It always was. But the reawakening of that power requires a shift in how you relate to stillness, uncertainty, and time. Most of us have been trained to move fast, to push, to prove. We treat transformation like a race, and in that speed we miss the nuance. We disconnect from the field that speaks not through urgency, but through rhythm. Greg Braden describes this field as intelligent and responsive, not in words, but in harmony. It does not respond to declarations shouted into the void. It responds to embodied presence. So how do we access that presence again, especially after years, maybe decades, of living out of sync? The answer isn't complex, but it is intimate. You return to your body. You slow down your breath. You listen before you speak. You feel before you interpret. In doing so, you enter into a state of receptivity, not the kind that waits passively, but the kind that attunes actively. It's a listening so profound, it becomes a language in itself, a language the universe knows how to understand. This presence is not about performance. It's not a posture of being spiritual. It's not about rituals you perform once a day while the rest of your life remains fragmented. True presence is a frequency you carry into everything. The way you drink water, the way you move through conflict, the way you greet your own tiredness. When you begin to live like this, your energy field reorganizes itself, not because you've perfected anything, but because you've surrendered the false need to control, and something extraordinary begins to unfold. You stop second-guessing every delay. You stop needing signs to appear in dramatic fashion. You begin to trust that the signal is always being transmitted, and your work is simply to stay open enough to receive it. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with consistency, with tenderness, with a quiet kind of discipline that grows stronger each time you choose to pause before reacting, breathe before interpreting, and soften before forcing. This realignment is not just spiritual, it is physiological. When your heart enters coherence, when its rhythms stabilize into a harmonious pattern, your nervous system relaxes. Your brain enters into a state of increased clarity. Your emotions lose their volatility. This state, measured scientifically, is where insight, guidance, and synchronicity are most likely to arise. But it's not because the universe finally answers you. It's because you finally become still enough to hear what has always been speaking. In this space, your relationship with power changes. Power is no longer about effort. It's about congruence, about integrity with your own vibration, about no longer betraying your truth to gain temporary comfort or approval. And when that kind of inner power is activated, the universe aligns, not because you force it to, but because you've become the kind of presence it naturally collaborates with. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy or smooth. Challenges will still arise. Old patterns will still tempt you, but your orientation shifts. You begin to read difficulty not as a block, but as a signal, a redirection, a moment to deepen, not retreat. And even in moments of confusion, you will trust your ability to recalibrate, not because you have all the answers, but because you've remembered how to listen. Listening becomes your ritual. You learn to listen not only to the world, but to the subtle cues within. The contraction in your chest when you're about to say yes to something you don't want. The lightness in your body when something feels aligned even if it scares you. The deep exhale that comes when you finally speak your truth. These are signs too, sacred ones. And when you honor them, your life begins to harmonize with something much greater than desire. It begins to harmonize with destiny. This is not magic. This is resonance. The same way music aligns to a tuning fork, your reality aligns to the frequency you inhabit. And your frequency is not static. It is sculpted daily by your choices, your thoughts, your self-talk, and your willingness to feel instead of flee. The more you stay with yourself in the silence, the more power you reclaim. Not power over, but power within. Eventually, you stop waiting for signs to tell you what to do. Instead, you notice the ones that arise the moment you act in integrity. You say no to something you used to tolerate, and the next day, something unexpected opens. You choose rest instead of rushing, and insight lands in the stillness. You let go of needing to know, and the path reveals itself not all at once, but step by sacred step. You're not manifesting out of fear anymore. You're moving from coherence. In time, this coherence becomes second nature. You begin to trust not only the universe, but yourself, and that trust becomes the magnet for a new way of living, where signs are not instructions, but confirmations, where power is not asserted but remembered, and where silence is no longer feared but revered. Because now you understand, the universe was never speaking in a foreign tongue. You were just disconnected from the rhythm. But the moment you chose to return, to listen, to align, to soften, that rhythm became music again. Not loud, not dramatic, but true. And in its truth, your strength was reawakened, not as something to seek, but something to live, quietly, consistently, and completely. Returning to the invisible, the power of listening to silence and reclaiming the journey. There is a moment in every transformation where words fall short, where answers no longer come in the form of explanations, but in presence, in stillness, in a breath that no longer resists what is. This is where you are now. After all the searching, the rituals, the questions, Perhaps the real breakthrough isn't in what you learn, but in what you remember, that the universe was never absent. It was always moving with you, through you, as you. Joe Dispenza reminds us that true change is not about wishing for a different future, but becoming someone new in the present. And in that becoming, silence becomes sacred. It is the container of possibility, the womb of intuition, the doorway through which the invisible becomes form. Greg Braden speaks of the divine matrix, a field of connection that doesn't require proof, only coherence. And in that coherence, signs begin to appear not because you're chasing them, but because you've tuned yourself to the very rhythm of the universe, the same rhythm found in nature, in breath, in love. You don't need to force your way back to alignment. You only need to stop resisting your own truth. Your inner power isn't something to activate, it's something to remember. And the silence that once felt like abandonment becomes the invitation to slow down, to listen again, to trust the deeper current beneath all the noise. So if you felt disconnected, unheard, or uncertain, let this be your reminder. The universe hasn't forgotten you. It's been speaking all along, in symbols, in timing, in whispers beneath your thoughts. You were not being ignored. You were being initiated. And now your real journey begins, not toward something outside of you, but toward the deeper resonance within. You are not lost. You are being summoned. Before you go, ask yourself this. What if the silence you've been fearing is the exact place where your transformation begins? If this message resonated with you, subscribe to our channel. Let this space be your sanctuary of reconnection. And don't stop here. Keep watching the next video on your screen. There's more to remember, more to awaken, and this is only the beginning.